This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Freilich in Chanukah. Welcome everybody to the Kollel Agra de Pirka here on planet Earth in Kew Garden Hills in Cedarhurst, and welcome everyone to the special Chanukah edition. We have an amazing Shiur prepared for today on a very wondrous subject, and we're going to be studying and learning the ramifications and the phenomenon of the miracle of Chanukah in the worldview of the Maharal of Prague, of the great Rabbi Yehuda Lowy, who was one of the great all-time masters in what is known as Machshavas Yisrael. And it's very interesting. The Maharal wrote many Sfarim. The Maharal was a prolific writer, and we're going to be citing today from many of the Sfarim of the Maharal, from about 9 of the Sfarim of the Maharal, regarding the miracle of Chanukah. The Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Yehuda Lowy, was born in the year 1526, and some say he actually was born in as early as 1512, and he was nifter in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, in the year 1609. He was the son of Betzalel Lowy and the grandson of Reb Lowy, the elder of Prague, who was a great Makubal. He traced himself back to Rav Haigoin and all the way back Lamala Min HaKodesh to David HaMelech himself. Now, the Maharal of Prague had many great Talmidim. He was the Rebbe of the Tzemach David, Rav David Gans, who was born in 1541. He lived until 1613. Rav David Gans actually wandered from Germany to Krakow to be able to study from the Ramah, and he was an astronomer. He was a historian. He corresponded with Tycho Brahe and Johann Kepler, but today we're going to speak about the Maharal of Prague. He became the Rav in Nikolsburg at a very young age, at the age of, we don't know exactly because we don't know exactly when he was born, but it was at quite a young age, and he served as the Rav in the Av Bezdin for 20 years. He then came in 1573 to Prague. He was the Av Bezdin in Prague, and he opened a yeshiva in Prague, which was known as the Klois. He was then a Rav in Pozna, and then ultimately he made his way back to Prague. Now, the Maharal is recognized as one of the greatest masters of Machshavas Yisrael, even though Rav Itzla Petterberg, in his list of Sifrei Musar, lists the Svarim of the Maharal as one of the classic Musar Svarim. And the Maharal has a very interesting approach to the understanding the Yom Tov of Chanukah and the miracles that took place on Chanukah. And that is, the Maharal says that and we're going to begin by studying something the Maharal writes in the Sefer Ner Mitzvah. The Ner Mitzvah was written about Chanukah. The first part of the Sefer discusses the dreams of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, seeing the Daled Malchios in the guise of various animals. And the second half of the Sefer discusses Hilchos Chanukah. Now, we all know the Gemara says, K'shenichnasu Yevanim leheichal. And the Maharal says that the Yevanim, by entering the Heichal, they had the specific ability and capacity to dominate and rule and contaminate the Heichal. And the reason they were able to have this koyach is because if you take the word Heichal, the numerical value of the word Heichal is 65, and Yavan is Gematria 66. And therefore, because Yavan has a numerical value of 66, one more than Heichal, they had this unique ability to dominate and to contaminate the Heichal. Now, the Heichal was part of the Beis HaMikdash, and the Heichal is known as the Kodesh. So, their ability to overcome the Heichal, they showed that the Yevanim control what is known as Kodesh. However, what the Yevanim do not have Shlita over is they don't have dominion and shlita over what is called Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. Now, the shemen with which the shemen which the Yevanim contaminated, the shemen represents Kedusha, because oil is always used for sanctification, to sanctify the kohen, to sanctify the kelim, to be used in the Beis HaMikdash, to sanctify a melech. So the shemen hamishcha represents kodesh. In other words, the Yevanim had a specific and special capacity to contaminate kodesh. However, what they don't have the capacity to contaminate is they cannot contaminate what is called Kodesh HaKadoshim, Holy of Holies. And therefore there was one flask of oil that was signed, that was sealed with the seal of none other than the Kohen Gadol. Because this flask fit under the umbrella category of that which is known as Kodesh Kadoshim. It's not merely Kodesh, but it is known as Kodesh Kadoshim, that was sealed with the signet of the Kohen Gadol, because the Kohen Gadol represents Kodesh Kadoshim. Now, we mentioned that the Kohen has capacity to dominate over what? The Yevanim have capacity to dominate Kodesh, because Heichal is 65 and Yavan is 66. However, the Maharal quotes an amazing sefer called the Sefer Michlal, written by Rav David Kimchi, the author of Radak. And the Sefer Michlal is a work of grammar. And the Radak teaches that all the Tenuais Gedolos, the Tenuais Gedolos are a Chirik Malay, a Shuruk, a Tseirei, a Chaylam, and a Kamatz Gadol. And they are remembered with the phraseology Pituche Choisam. Pituche, the Pei has a Yud after it. The Shuruk has a Vav. The Tseirei has a Yud. The Chaylam is a Tnua Gedola, followed by a Kamatz Gadol. Now, the Radak teaches us that a Tseirei could be followed by a Yud, but it doesn't have to be. For example, in the word May, the word May could be spelled Mem with a Tseirei underneath it. It could be followed by a Yud, but it doesn't have to, because the Tseirei alone phonetically sounds as if there's a Yud there. So it could have a Yud there, but it doesn't have to have a Yud there. For example, in the word Bereshis, Beis Reish, Aleph, there's a Tseirei under the Reish, and there's no Yud, because the Yud does not have to follow the Tseirei, but it can. Now, in the word Heichal, Hey Yud Chaf Lamed, which is 65, there happens to be a Yud that follows the Tseirei. However, says the Maharal of Prague, that Yud happens to follow the Tseirei, but the Tseirei automatically contains a Yud with it, even if it's not written. Because every Tseirei, it's as if there's a Yud. So when there's a Yud, there are really two Yuds. The one that it says, and the one it doesn't have to say. So even though the numerical value of Heichal is 65, that's if you don't include the unspoken Yud. But if you include the unspoken Yud, then Heichal in fact is 75. And there's a hidden secret Yud in the word Heichal. It happens to be that there is a Yud after the Hey. That's a spoken Yud, but there's also an unspoken Yud, because the Tseirei automatically has a Yud in it. So while the Yevanim were able to dominate Heichal 65, which is Kodesh, the Yud represents Kodesh HaKadoshim. As the Maharal explains, the Kodesh HaKadoshim was 10 by 10, Yud by Yud. So, says the Maharal, even though the Yevanim were able to defile that which is Kodesh, there is a hidden Yud, a secret power of Kodesh HaKadoshim in the Kodesh, which represents the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which is Nistar, which is Yud times Yud. And therefore, using this approach to the Maharal, that the Yevanim had shlita over the Kodesh, but they did not have control over the Kodesh HaKadoshim, we're going to analyze many of the Svarim of the Maharal, studying the following subject, and that is the significance and the symbolism of the following two numbers, the letter 7 and the letter 8. And in the world of the Maharal, the number 7 and the number 8 specifically reference, number 7 references the Koyach HaTeva, and the number 8 symbolizes Lamala Min HaTeva. In fact, the Maharal writes, that is why, famously there's a question, why is Chanukah 8 days? The famous question of the Beis Yosef. Why do we have 8 days of Chanukah, while the miracle only happened for 7 days? And the Maharal answers that is because the miracle of Chanukah represented superiority over Teva. Teva is the number 7, while the number 8 is Lamala Min HaTeva. The Yevanim only dominated Kodesh, but they had no capacity over Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. Hence, Chanukah is 8 days. And the Maharal takes this teaching, and throughout his writings, this is a very major theme in the writings of the Maharal. So, for instance, the Maharal wrote a Sefer, Tiferes Yisrael, and if you look on your sheet in number 8, the Maharal says in Tiferes Yisrael, which is a Sefer about Kabbalas HaTorah, that the nations of the world are bound and governed by Teva, and therefore there are 70 nations of the world. In the writings of the Maharal, 70 or 700 or 7,000 is the equivalent of 7. These zeros don't make a difference. So the nations of the world have 70 nations. Shivim Umais. Why? Because they exist in the world of Gashmias, physicality. They are bound by nature. There's 7 days a week because God created this natural world through the process of 7. So since there's 7 days a week, the number 7 represents Teva, and each day are connected to a specific group of 10 nations. That is why, says the Maharal, we understand the nations of the world were given Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. 7 mitzvahs, 7 Noachide laws. Why 7 Noachide laws? Because the nations of the world are bound by the number 7. That's why the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, on Daf Nun Vav, Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. The Maharal, in the Netzach Yisrael, Perek Yutes, explains a Gemara in Erechin. The Gemara in Erechin, for those of you who learn Erechin, I think my good friends in London are learning Erechin. Why they're learning? Vaharavna. Okay. The Gemara in Erechin says in Yud Gimel Amud Beis, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the kinar, the harp of the Mikdash had 7 strings. Like it says, Soiva semachos es panecha, al tikri soiva ela sheva. Yemois HaMashiach will have 8 strings. What is the significance of that? The harp is the musical accompaniment to Shira. Shira symbolizes reaching a milestone, completing an achievement. Therefore, Shira is a marker of shleimus. As human beings, the greatest amount of shleimus we could reach in this world is 7, Koyach HaTeva, and therefore the harp of the Mikdash was 7 strings. But in Yemois HaMashiach, we will supersede nature, and the Messianic era will be beyond Teva, will surpass the natural world, and therefore the harp of Mashiach will have 8 strings. That's why some suggest that when Mashiach comes, there will be an 8th note. That's why a lot of musicians like to call their albums 8th Day, or the day 8, or something like that, representing the change in music in the world in the days of the future. The Maharal wrote a deep philosophical work on the Agadatos of Shas, and in his Chidushei called Chidushei Agados, and the Maharal explains that the number 7, the Maharal is the number 12. The number 7 is Keneged Shivas Yimei Bereshis, and which is Olam HaTeva, which the Maharal writes in a beautiful drush for Shabbos Tshuva, page 14 as well. Now the Maharal says something amazing. If you look into Tehillim, Perek Yotes, Lam Natseach Mizmar LeDavid, Hashamayim Misaprim Kvoid Kel Umasa Yadav Magid Harakia, It's one of my favorite psukim. Yom liyom yabia oimer, v'layla l'layla yichave das. Well, I did steal a little bit because this next pasuk was really mined for good names. So we have over here Yabia Oimer, Yichave Das. So somebody told me they want to write a sefer called Ein Oimer, and then they want to write a sequel called Ve'ein Dvarim. But anyway, the first seven psukim of Perek Yotes talks about the physical world. The sun, the moon, the stars, the celestial spheres. You think it's a coincidence? How many psukim are used to describe the physical world? That's right, 7 psukim. But then David HaMelech begins to describe the greatness and the majesty of the Torah. And what does it say about the Torah? 8 psukim. Torah's Hashem Tamima, Meshivas Nafesh. Eidos Hashem Ne'amana Machivas Pesi. David HaMelech uses 8 psukim. Why? Because the natural world is 7, and therefore, until Taras Hashem Tamima is 7 psukim. Taras Hashem Tamima is the 8th pasuk, because the Hanhagas HaTeva was created in 7 days, and the Torah is Lamala Min HaTeva. Mar v'Rabosai, that is why in Perek Kuf Yud Tes of Tehillim, Ashrei Semimei Darach Alchim Azaras Hashem, which is the longest Perek of Tehillim, which is about the Torah, you have 8 Pesukim for each letter of the Aleph base, indicating that the Torah is Lemala Min HaTeva. The Torah is above and beyond nature. And anything which is above and beyond nature, anything that conquers nature, is number 8. So Mila is done on the 8th day, because Mila is overcoming the deficiency of Arla, which is a inherent deficiency of Teva, which is the number 7, and therefore Mila is number 8. And that is why, Marv Rabbi say, when Bilam made a Mizbeach, Bilam made 7 Mizbechos. Now, the Maharal says as follows. The Maharal says something very interesting. That when a baby is born, the teva of a child dictates that it has to be an RL, because nature is by definition deficient. And therefore, the Mila, the Maharal writes, let's see, number 17. The Mila, Shehi ala Teva, the Mila which is above and beyond Teva, because b'Teva a person is born Noila and RL, because the Teva dictates that we should be an RL, and the Mila is Lamala min Teva. Therefore the Mila is on day 8. So the Mila is Kodesh. The Mila is more than Kodesh, it's Kodesh Kadashim. In other words, the number 8 is Kodesh Kadashim. Now, interestingly, Rev Yeshua Hartman, in his notes on the Maharal, he references 2 other teachings of the Maharal, explaining why a person has to be born RL. In Gvurais Hashem, the Maharal writes, in number 18, that he talks about the Geula from Mitzrayim, and in his 35th chapter, the Maharal mentions that the Arla is a mavdil between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Adam. Arla separates between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In Tiferes Yisrael, the Maharal writes that what really separates between man and God is Teva. And these 2 teachings work together very seamlessly. Because why is it that we look at a sunset and we're not enthralled? We recognize that we could think, and we could process, and we could see, and we're not moved, we're not inspired. That is because nature drags us down. And by definition, the Maharal writes, nature is deficient, and therefore the Arla is a perforce deficiency in man, and it serves to separate between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's Teva. However, the Mila, which is done on the 8th day, is Lamala Min HaTeva, and that connects us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that raises us up to the Madrega of Lamala Min HaTeva, and that is why the Maharal writes in his Drush Noya for Shabbos Tshuva, in number 20, the Maharal says that when Aaron HaKohen would go into the Holy of Holies, it says, Bezayis Yavoy Aharon El HaKodesh, and the Medrash says, B'schos HaMila, because it says, V'zois HaTorah. Why does the Mila allow Aaron HaKohen to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Because the Kodesh HaKadoshim is the number 8. Lamala Megashmios. So is the Mila. Arla is 7 and Mila is 8. And therefore, the Kohen Gadol, says Maharal, prepares for 7 days. Shiva Yomim Koydem Yom HaKippurim Afrishin Kohen Gadol Mi Beisai. And then on the 8th day, he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which is Lamala Min HaTeva. By the way, Chazal tell us, you ever go to a bris milah and they sing a zemer Yom Li Abasha, which is a zemer about what? About Kriyas Yamsuf. Why in the world are we talking about Kriyas Yamsuf at a bris milah? Because Chazal say, Shimon HaTeimani Omer, B'schus HaMila Nivka Hayam. Why did God split the sea in the merit of the Milah? The answer is, Milah is on the 8th day. Milah represents Lamala Min HaTeva. Water filling up every crevice and going to its lowest point is the most basic element of nature. The only way to split the sea is to create a phenomenon Lamala Min HaTeva. So through the Kayach of Milah, which is the number 8, which is Lamala Min HaTeva, which supersedes 7, we were able to split the sea. Marv Rabbi, now we understand, says the Maharal, a davar pashut ma'od. The Maharal writes in his Chidushei Agados on Nedarim, Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. We know Gedoyla Mila Shadoiches HaShabbos. Why is Mila Doiches Shabbos very pashut, says Maharal? Shabbos is 7. It's the Kayach HaTeva. Mila is 8, is the Kayach Lamala Min HaTeva. It is elementary then that Mila is more important and more fundamental than the Kayach of Shabbos, and that is why the Maharal writes that on Yom Kippur, which is the 8th day, we're mafresh the Kohen Gadol Mi Beisai 7 days, and Yom Kippur is the 8th day, and he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. How many begadim is he wearing? He's wearing, the Maharal writes, in Ner Mitzvah on Chanukah, the Kohen Gadol is wearing Mishamesh B'Shmoina begadim. He's wearing 8 garments. And that is why on Yom Kippur he sprinkles Achas Limala V'Sheva Lamata, 1 above and 7 below, to indicate 7 forces Teva is pulling you down. It's the 8th, the Kayach of the number 8, that pulls you up and allows you to reach Lamala Min HaTeva. That is why the Torah, before we receive the Torah, we count 49 days, 7 times 7, the ultimate 7, the essence of 7, and we say, no, the Torah was not given in these 49 days, because the Torah is not given in the power of Teva. The Torah is given after 7, 50. 50 is Lamala Min HaTeva. 50 is the ultimate 8. The ultimate 8 is 50. The Heichal is 7. The Heichal is 65. That's the Kodesh. But there is a secret element of Kedusha in the Menorah, the hidden Yud. The Yud of Heichal, that it doesn't say, but it's implied. There is Kodesh HaKadoshim influencing the Menorah. In the Kodesh HaKadoshim was the Aron. We could add Ar Nun, the light of the 50th. Aron is Ar Nun. The Torah was given on the 50th day. By the way, the Ber HaGoyla says during Bayis Sheni, there were 80 Kohanim Gedolim, as we said, there are 70 nations of the world, because 70 is 7. There were 80 Kohanim Gedolim, which is 8, the power of 8. And that's why the Maharal writes in Tiferes Yisrael that interestingly, when the Kohanim, any Kohanim on today? Any Kohanim? Any aspiring Kohanim? Yeah, Michael, you're a Kohen? You're an aspiring Kohen. So Michael's a Kohen. So when you're... Yeah, Mazel Tov. So when a Kohen is Mavarich, Yisraelim for Birchas Kohanim, as opposed to all other mitzvahs, where you say Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvah isav, the Kohen says Asher Kedeshanu b'kedushasai shel Aharon, which is difficult. Why does a Kohen invoke a different level of kedusha when he's mavarich the people than when doing any other mitzvah? By any other mitzvah, you say Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvah isav. Why, when it comes to Birchas Kohanim, does the Kohen invoke the kedusha of the kahuna? So Rav Hartman, in his notes on the Maharal, he says that the kedusha of mitzvahs is the kedusha of teva. The kedusha of kahuna or Torah is lamala min teva. So it's a different level of kedusha. It's a different parameter of kedusha, and therefore we say Asher Kedeshanu. The Kohen says Asher Kedeshanu b'kedushasai shel Aharon, and therefore the Maharal says the miracle of Chanukah demonstrated that even though Yavan, which is 66, has power and shlita over the Heichal, which is 65, it could dominate Kodesh, but it cannot dominate Kodesh Kadashim. And the sanctity of Klal Yisrael came from the Kodesh HaKadashim, the hidden Yud in the Heichal. And therefore, since the Kedusha came from the hidden Yud in the Heichal, where the Aron is, which we could say is Arnun, the Ar, therefore, Chanukah's 8 days. Lamala min ateva. Now, let us progress on our wondrous journey. Every day we yearn for Mashiach. We all hope for Mashiach. Mashiach, Mashiach, we need you, right? We're all hoping for Mashiach. Ani mamin be'emunah shalem aviyas HaMashiach. When will Mashiach come? Hopefully soon. But the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Mashiach will come moitzai Shavias, in the 8th year of the Shemitah cycle. The Maharal explains in number 34 why the 8th year of Mashiach of the Shemitah cycle, because Mashiach is lemala min ateva. Yesh l'chol hadas ki ein roi l'Mashiach rak hamisper shu achar hashiva, which is the madrega of 8. Olam hazeh is 7. Olam haba is 8. Now, the Kli Yakar as well explains that the Kohanim, they're inaugurated for 7 days, but Vayehi Bayoim Hashmini, they began their service on the 8th day, because Kahuna is the power of Lamala min ateva, and likewise they begin on the 8th day. Now we have the following issue. Because if 7 is Teva and 8 is Lamala min ateva, how do we bridge the gap? How do we connect the world of Teva and the world of Lamala min ateva? So for this we come to the Maharal as well. Because the Maharal says in number 35, I know you were wondering that how come I didn't mention anything about Purim yet in this year. So don't worry, I'm about to. The pasuk says, Vayehi oimen es Hadasa, and she raised Hadassah, and he raised Hadassah. Say Chazal, how old was Esther at the time? Chazal says she was 75 years old. Just like Avram Avinu left his father's household at age 75, so too Hadassah was 75 years old. V'Avraham ben Chamesh shanim v'shivim shana b'tzeisai mecharan. Says the Maharal, why was Avram Avinu 75 when he left his father? Why was Esther 75 years old? The answer is because they had a unique responsibility. Esther had to connect the Klal Yisrael in this world, who were farshlufin, they were sleeping, and in kind Hashem accorded himself as if he was sleeping. So she had a kiviyachal wake up HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She said, Ura lama sishan Hashem hakitza. Ura lama sishan hakitza al tiznach lanetzach. Why are you sleeping? So she had to connect Shamayim va'aretz. So the same way 70 is 7 and 80 is 8, 75 is 7.5. 7.5 connects Shamayim va'aretz. Hadassah Esther had to connect heaven and earth. Likewise, Avraham Avinu. Chazal tell us that Hashem wanted to bring Kohanim from shame. Like it says, V'hu chayhein lekel el yain. But because he was Mavarech Avraham before he blessed God, like it says, Vayivarachehu vayoymar, Baruch Avraham lekel el yain, koinei shamayim va'aretz. So he should have blessed God first. Hashem took away kahuna from shame, and he gave it to Avraham. Now, Marv Rabbi say, Avraham was able to connect heaven and earth. He was the one who called God Adain. Now, the Maharal writes further that the gematria of Kohen is 75, because Kohen also, his responsibility, his job is to connect heaven and earth, to do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash and bring down the shefa min hashamayim. That is why we know the Mikdash was known as a tzavar, a neck, bridging the gap between the aretz and the shamayim, bridging the gap between this world and the upper worlds. So the number 7 is teva, olam hazeh. The number 8 is lamala min teva, olam haba. And the way we bridge it, we had an Avraham, 75 years old. We had an Esther, 75 years old. We have Kohen, gematria 75. They're able to bridge the gap between Shamayim va'aretz. So now Marv Rabbi say, even though the menorah has 7 branches, and even though the menorah is in the Heichal, but as we mentioned, there is a hidden element of Kodesh HaKadoshim in the menorah, and that is, the Gemara teaches us that Moshe Rabbeinu understood 49 levels of wisdom, and he did not know the 50th level of wisdom. This is symbolized by the menorah. The menorah has 22 goblets. It has 11 knobs. It has 9 parachim, 9 flowers, 42. The 7 branches make it 49. Moshe Rabbeinu understood the menorah because the menorah are the 49 levels of wisdom. But the menorah itself is the 50th level of wisdom, the power of 8, the unspoken yud of the Heichal. And Moshe didn't understand that. Moshe was niskasha b'menorah. He knew the 49 levels of wisdom represented by the menorah, but he didn't understand the menorah itself. Marv Rabbi say, so even though when you look at the menorah superficially, it seems to represent the power of 7, and at first the Yavanim were able to dominate the menorah because they are Yavan 66, they could dominate 65. Nevertheless, upon further analysis, there is a hidden aspect of Kodesh HaKadoshim that is latent in the menorah, emanating from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The koyach of the Kohen Gadol is a power of 8. He has 8 begadim, Choshen, Ephod, Me'il, Mitznefes, Avneit. He has 8 begadim. The Levium, Kedusha, very often has association with the number 8. The Levium, there are 8 instruments that the Levium used. Lamnatze beneginois, mochalas, alomois, masa, shoishanim, nechilois, gitois, shminis. There were 8 types of instruments played by the Levium. The power of sanctity, the power of Kedusha is always associated with the number 8. There were 8 fragrances in the Shemen HaMishkan and the Ketairas. There were 8 badim in the various appurtenances in the Heichal, 2 in the Arayin, 2 in the Shulchan, 2 in the Mizrach Hazav, 2 in the Mizrach HaPnimi. On the 8th day, Rabbeinu Bechaye says, Karbanos are brought, Umiyayim Hashemini Vahala Yera'el Karbanishe. So we have 8 strings of tzitzis. And I saw in a sefer, Zecher Avraham, page Mem Tes Amud Beis, something quite remarkable. That is why on Chanukah, which at first the Yevanim, which were 66, were able to dominate, the Heicha, which is 65. But there was a hidden Yud, the power of the 10 by 10, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that emanated from the Arayin, the Ar Nun, the 50th level, that the Yevanim had no shlita over. That is why in the Bimei Matisyahu, of course, we say as follows: Ravta es rivam, danta es dinam, nakamta es nikmasam, asad gibarim biyad chaloshim, v'rabim biyad ma'atim, utmeim biyad tohirim, ursham biyad tzadikim, v'zeidim biyad oiskei sarosacha. We have 8 expressions of gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for saving us and bringing us lamala min ha-teva. The Jewish people are not governed by the laws of Teva, because we have Bris Milah, which overrides Teva. We have Torah, which is referred to in Parakuf Yotes of Tehillim in the number 8. Teva is praised with 7 psukim in Parak Yotes. But the 8th pasuk is the Torah. The Torah is Lamala min ha-teva. The menorah seemed to have been Shiva Kanim, but in reality it had a hidden source of Kedusha, which was 8 garments of the Kohen Gadol. The 8th day is the day that the Kohen Gadol would begin his avodah in the on Yom Kippur. 70 nations, Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. But Klal Yisrael had 80 Kohanim Gedolim. Bilam builds 7 Mizbechos. But our Milah is Doicha Shabbos, which is on the 8th day. So, Rebbeinu Shalom gave us a Torah after 49 days, 7 times 7, indicating that if we are rooted in the Torah Kedosha and we are rooted in the 8 days, the power of Shmoina of Chanukah. By the way, Rav Hutner points out the number Sheva is a lashon of Saveya, satisfied. This natural world has everything in it that is needed, but just what it needs. Shmoina is fatty excess. That indicates it's lemala from Teva. It's above and beyond. So even the etymology of these numbers mean what the message that they convey. So if we're able to connect ourselves with the Torah Kedosha, we're able to rise up lemala min ha-teva, above all the vicissitudes of Olam Hazeh and Teva and Arla. And what we learned today comes from many of the Svarim of the Maharal, the Ner Mitzvah, the Tiferes Yisrael, the Netzach Yisrael, the Gur Aryeh, Drush Noah L'Shabbos Tshuva, Chidushi Agados, Gevurais Hashem, Be'er HaGoyla, Ar Chadash, and further. Okay, Rabbi Sai, I want to wish everybody a Chag Sameach, Freilich and Chanukah. Thanks for joining. And as always, you could catch the Shiur on TorahAnytime.com or on podcast. Wishing everyone a wondrous day. Now, tomorrow night, there's no Igeras Hagra Shiur over Chanukah. Tomorrow night, we may have a special event, even a special musical event, L'Kavod, the yard side of the great Tana, Rabbi Meir. So stay tuned for that, and have a wonderful day. Kol Tov.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.